Marcus Hayes wiped his hands on the shop rag for the third time that morning, but the grease stayed where it always stayed, embedded in the creases of his palms, the lines around his knuckles, the half-moons under his nails. 38 years old, and his hands looked 50. He'd stopped trying to scrub them clean after the first year at Morrison's Auto. Dorothy used to say she could smell the motor oil on him before he even opened the front door, back when she could still get up from the kitchen table without wincing. The F-150 above him had a slow oil leak from the pan gasket. Nothing catastrophic, just the kind of problem that would turn into something expensive if the owner kept ignoring it. Marcus threaded the drain plug back in with his fingers first, feeling for the threads, making sure it's seated right before he reached for the torque wrench. Shortcuts in this work came back to haunt you. Always did. Jefferson Avenue Auto. People still called it that, even though Brenda Morrison had rebranded it. Morrison's Auto 3 years back sat on a corner lot where the commercial district started its slow fade into residential. 6 bays, decent foot traffic, enough regular customers to keep the lights on. Marcus had been here 6 years, long enough to know which floorboards creaked, which bay door stuck in humidity, which regulars tipped at Christmas, and which ones acted like you'd done them a favor by letting them pay full price. Tony Rodriguez crouched down beside the F-150, boots scuffing against the concrete. "Brenda's already here. Came in early." Marcus didn't look up from the drain pan. "She say why?" "Parrish called in sick again. That's the 3rd time this month." "Parrish always calls in sick." "I know." Tony's voice carried something else underneath, something careful. "But Brenda's in a mood about it. She's looking for someone to chew on." Marcus slid out from under the truck on the creeper, sat up, wiped his hands again out of habit. Tony had been at Morrison's for 9 years, longer than anyone except Brenda herself. Good mechanic, decent man, the kind who remembered his co-workers' birthdays and never took the last coffee without making a fresh pot. But 9 years at the same shop had worn something down in him. He'd applied for foreman twice. Brenda had passed him over both times for guys who didn't last 6 months. "I'll be fine." Tony shrugged, picked up a shop rag, wiped his own hands even though they were already clean. "Your funeral, brother." Marcus went back under the truck. The leak wasn't bad enough to need a full gasket replacement yet, just a retorque on the bolts and maybe some sealant if the owner wanted to be proactive. Most people didn't want to be proactive. They wanted their cars to run forever without maintenance and then acted surprised when physics disagreed. He'd gotten maybe 4 hours of sleep. Dorothy had been up since 2 in the morning with the pain in her hip, the arthritis that started 5 years ago and kept getting worse in ways the doctors described with words like progressive degeneration and limited mobility. The medication that actually worked cost $240 a month. The medication their insurance covered made her nauseous and barely touched the pain. So they bought the good stuff when they could afford it and stretched it when they couldn't, and last night Dorothy had been up at 2 a.m. because they were 3 days away from running out, and Marcus's next paycheck wasn't until Friday. 11 days until rent was due. $850. He had $600 in checking, another $100 in the coffee can in the kitchen that Dorothy didn't know about, though she probably did know about it because Dorothy knew everything. The math worked if nothing went wrong. The math always worked if nothing went wrong. Marcus finished with the F-150 by 7:45 and moved on to a Chevy Malibu with a coolant leak that turned out to be worse than the work order suggested. Bad hose connection, but also a cracked overflow reservoir that nobody had caught on the initial inspection. He'd have to call the customer, explain why the bill was going up. Some people understood. Some people accused you of inventing problems to pad the invoice. The bell above the front door chimed at 8:30. Marcus heard it from Bay 3 but didn't look up. Darren handled the front desk in the mornings, and Darren had exactly one mode: indifferent efficiency. Good at paperwork, terrible at people. Brenda kept him around because he showed up on time and didn't steal. But then he heard the voice. Older woman, slightly breathless, the particular cadence of someone who'd been through enough weather in life that even ordinary requests came out apologetic. "Excuse me, I'm so sorry to bother anyone, but I think something is very wrong with my car." Marcus straightened, looked through the glass partition between the shop floor and the waiting area. The woman stood near the front counter in a tan overcoat that had been expensive once, maybe 10 years ago, maybe 15. Clean but worn in the way clothes get when you take care of them long past their intended lifespan. White hair pulled back, neat but unstyled. Both hands wrapped around a small leather purse, dark brown, holding it the way people hold things when they're not sure if they're in the right place. Darren didn't look up from his phone. "Fill out the form. Clipboard's by the door." The woman turned, located the clipboard, reached for it. Then she paused, squinted at the form, held it at arm's length. She was trying to read it without her glasses. She patted her purse, once, twice, looking for reading glasses she'd either forgotten or lost. Marcus set down his wrench. Walked through the side door into the waiting area. "Ma'am, can I help you?" She looked at him with relief so plain it hit him somewhere behind his ribs. People didn't look relieved often enough in places like this. Mostly they looked suspicious, braced for bad news and high estimates. "Oh, thank you, I'm sorry, I feel like such a nuisance." The words tumbled out, practiced apology. "The car started making this noise." She paused, searching for the right term. "A grinding sort of sound every time I turn, and it's been pulling to one side when I brake. My nephew told me to bring it in, but he lives in Phoenix." She stopped herself. "I'm sorry. You don't need my whole story." Marcus took the clipboard from her, set it on the counter. "I don't mind the story. Pull your car around to Bay 3. I'll take a look." Darren glanced up from his phone now, registered what was happening, then looked back down. Not his problem. The woman's face shifted, something between gratitude and uncertainty. "What's the cost for the inspection?" "Let's see what's wrong first." She nodded, slow, like she was memorizing his face. Then she walked back out to the parking lot. Marcus followed her outside. The car was a 2003 Honda Accord, silver, the kind of vehicle that had been meticulously maintained in its early years, and then gradually, gently neglected as life got in the way. The passenger side mirror had a small crack sealed with clear packing tape. The rear bumper carried a dent that looked at least a decade old, the paint scraped down to primer. Through the rear window, Marcus could see a folded quilt on the back seat, a library book with a worn dust jacket, a canvas grocery bag with the faded logo of a store he didn't recognize. She handed him the keys without meeting his eyes. "It's been making that sound for about a week. I kept thinking it would stop." Marcus drove the car into Bay 3 himself, pulled it onto the lift. The woman stood just inside the bay door, hands still wrapped around that purse, watching. He could feel her attention, not the anxious watching of someone waiting to be ripped off, but actual attention. She was paying attention to how he moved, how he handled her car, what he did first. 4 minutes under the Accord told him everything. Front brake pads worn down to metal, grinding against the rotor every time she touched the pedal. Left tie rod end loose enough to explain the pull she'd felt. Power steering fluid so low the reservoir was basically empty, which was why she heard grinding on turns. He lowered the car, walked back to where she stood. "Okay, here's what I found." He kept his voice level, no jargon, no rush. Showed her the brake pad, pointed to where the friction material had worn completely away, explained what would happen if she drove another 100 miles without fixing it. Showed her the tie rod, explained why a loose tie rod was a safety issue, not just a comfort problem. Told her about the power steering fluid. She listened to every word. Not the half-listening people did when they were already calculating the damage, already gone somewhere else in their heads. She actually listened. "How bad is it?" "The brakes are the priority. The tie rod is a safety issue too. You need both done today. The power steering fluid is easy, just a top-off." "And the cost?" Marcus looked at her, looked at the car, thought about the clear tape on the mirror and the quilt on the back seat, and the way she'd held that clipboard at arm's length without her glasses. "What's your name?" The question seemed to surprise her. "Eleanor. Eleanor Voss." "Mrs. Voss, where are you headed today?" "I have a doctor's appointment at 11. And then I was going to try to get to the pharmacy before they close early on Wednesdays. Marcus nodded slowly, did the math on the parts, brake pads, tie rod end, power steering fluid, maybe $90 in parts if he pulled from shop inventory. Labor would be his own time, his own hands, nothing Brenda needed to know about until after. Go sit inside. I'll have this done in about an hour. What's the damage? She asked it again, careful, and he heard something underneath the question. She had a number in her head, a maximum she could afford, and she was bracing against the possibility that his number would be higher. Let's just get it done first. He turned back to the car before she could push. He worked clean, methodical, the way he always worked when the job mattered. Replaced both front brake pads, torqued the tie rod end back to spec, topped off the power steering fluid, then drove the car forward and back in the bay to test the brakes. Good. Solid stop. No pull. He wiped down the steering wheel with a clean rag before he brought it back around because she'd kept the interior clean, and that deserved respect. Eleanor was sitting in the waiting area in the chair closest to the window, reading a magazine she'd brought from her bag. She looked up when he came through the door, set the magazine aside immediately, stood. All done. Oh, wonderful. She opened her purse. What do I owe you? Nothing. The word landed in the room and stayed there. Eleanor stared at him. I beg your pardon? No charge, Mrs. Voss. Young man. She shook her head. That's not right. You did work. You used parts. You spent your time. The parts were minor. The time was mine to give. Marcus paused, chose his words. My mother can't drive herself to her appointments anymore. Somebody in this world should be able to. Eleanor went quiet. She looked at him the way people sometimes look at something unexpected, not suspicious exactly, just trying to understand how it fits into what they already know about how the world works. You remind me of my late husband. Her voice had changed, gone softer. He was a man who thought that if you had the ability to help, you had the responsibility. He used to say it was the only honest way to live. He sounds like he was a good man. He was the best man I ever knew. She pressed her lips together, and for just a moment grief moved across her face, plain and familiar, the kind of grief that lives in people years after loss. Marcus looked away to give her privacy. Then she straightened her coat, opened her purse. I'm still paying you something. Mrs. Voss, at least let me. She was rifling through the purse now, and Marcus watched something shift in her expression. Not panic, but the quiet embarrassment of someone discovering they don't have what they thought they had. She went through the purse again, checked the side pocket, looked up at him. It seems I've left my wallet at home. I thought I had it. I was sure. Marcus could see the rectangular outline of a wallet in the main compartment of her purse, right there, the shape of it clear against the leather lining. She'd put her hand past it twice while searching. It was there. She knew it was there, and she was giving him an exit. It's fine. No, it's not fine. It's... She took a breath. It's terribly embarrassing. I'm not... This isn't something I normally do. I don't want you to think I don't think anything except that you've got a doctor's appointment at 11 and you should get moving if you want to make it. She looked at him for a long moment. Then, what's your name? Marcus Hayes. She nodded slowly, like she was recording it somewhere permanent. Mr. Hayes, thank you. More than I can say. Drive safe, Mrs. Voss. He held the door open for her. She walked to her car with the steadiness of someone who'd learned to hold herself together in public, no matter what was happening inside. Got in, started the engine. It turned over clean. No grinding, no hesitation. She paused for just a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, before she pulled out of the lot. Marcus watched her go, then turned back toward the shop. The heels hit the concrete before he made it 3 steps. Brenda Morrison came out of the back office at a speed that meant she'd been watching. She had a coffee mug in one hand, clipboard in the other, and her jaw set the way it got when she was about to make someone's day considerably worse. Tell me you charged that woman." The shop went quiet. Tony was pretending to inspect an engine block. Danny Chen, the kid who'd been there 6 months, suddenly became very interested in a tire display. Darren had put his phone away entirely, which almost never happened. Marcus turned to face her. "I didn't." "You didn't." Brenda said it flat, not a question. "She's an elderly woman. She needed the work. She left her wallet at home." "I don't care if she left her house at home, Marcus. Parts cost money. Your time costs money. This isn't a charity." "It was an hour of work and $90 in parts. I'll pay for the parts out of my own check." "That's not the point." "Then what is the point, Brenda?" It came out steady, not aggressive, not disrespectful, just direct. The kind of direct a man gets when he's been patient a long time and knows the difference between backing down because someone is right and backing down because someone is loud. Brenda's eyes narrowed. "The point is we're running a business. The point is that every time you do this, and let me tell you, this isn't the first time, you're telling every customer who walks in here that if they look sad enough, they can get free work. You want to know why margins are thin? You want to know why I can't give you the raise you asked for 3 months ago? Because of this. Because you can't separate your feelings from your job. I know the difference between my feelings and my judgment. I used judgment. Your judgment cost me money. Your judgment is losing you customers." Marcus kept his voice level. "Mrs. Gomez didn't come back after you charged her $400 for a job that should have been $250. Farrington down the street is taking the neighborhood work because people don't feel like they're being squeezed. You do not get to lecture me about my own shop. I'm not lecturing. I'm telling you what I see every day." The silence had weight now. Brenda set her coffee mug down on Darren's desk with a deliberate click. She straightened her clipboard. She looked at Marcus the way someone looks at a problem they've decided to stop managing and start eliminating. "You're done." Marcus said nothing. "Pack your tools. Turn in your keys. Whatever you've got in your locker, take it now. You're done here." Tony made a small sound that wasn't quite a word. Danny started to say something. "Brenda," but she cut him off without turning around. "Nobody asked you." She kept her eyes on Marcus. "I've carried you for 3 months past where I should have let you go. Every time you pull something like this, it costs me. And I put up with it because you're a good mechanic. But there are good mechanics on every corner, and none of them have your attitude problem. I've got an attitude problem because I helped an old woman get to her doctor safely. You've got an attitude problem because you think your personal moral code outranks how business works." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. Small. The way a man nods when he's decided the conversation is over, not because he lost, but because there's nothing left here worth winning. He walked to his toolbox. Nobody spoke while he loaded his bag. The sound of tools going into canvas, ratchets and sockets, and the good torque wrench he'd bought with his own money 6 years ago was the only sound in the bay. He zipped the bag, took his jacket off the hook on the wall, took the small photograph taped to the inside of his locker, Dorothy at his vocational school graduation, her arm around his shoulder, both of them beaming, and folded it carefully into his shirt pocket. He walked to Darren's desk and put his shop keys on the counter. Didn't slam them. Set them down. Looked at Tony, who was staring at the floor. Looked at Danny, whose face was doing something complicated and guilty. Didn't look at Brenda again. Marcus walked out the front door of Morrison's Auto into the white morning light with his tool bag over his shoulder. Stood on the sidewalk for a moment, listening to the sound of Jefferson Avenue. Traffic. A dog barking somewhere. The distant sound of a radio from an upstairs window. He thought about Dorothy waiting at home. Thought about the medication that cost $240. Thought about the conversation he was going to have with her tonight. How she would try not to show how worried she was, and how he would try not to show it either, and how they would both sit at the kitchen table being careful with each other. He thought about Eleanor Voss pulling out of the lot in that silver Accord, her hands resting on the steering wheel for just a moment before she drove away. He thought, I did the right thing. He thought, I don't know how I'm going to make rent. Marcus shifted the tool bag on his shoulder and started walking. He had no idea that 7 blocks away in a parking lot outside a medical building, an old woman in a tan overcoat was sitting in her car, not driving yet, thinking about a mechanic named Marcus Hayes, about the way he'd explained what was wrong with her car without making her feel foolish, about the way he'd said somebody in this world should be able to get to their appointments. Eleanor Voss had not become what she was by ignoring the moments that mattered. She opened her purse. The wallet was there, as it had always been. She took out her phone. Marcus walked 4 blocks before he let himself stop. Not because his legs gave out, not because the tool bag got heavy, though it did. He stopped because he passed a bus bench in front of a dry cleaner and sat down the way a man sits when he needs a moment to be honest with himself before moving forward. 6 years. 6 years at Morrison's. He'd started there when Dorothy first got the diagnosis, the hip problem, then the medication, then the slow grinding arithmetic of managing someone else's pain on a mechanic's hourly wage. He'd taken the job because it was close enough to home that he could check on her during lunch. He'd stayed because he was good at it, because Morrison's had steady regulars, because consistency mattered when everything else in life was shifting. Now he sat on a bus bench at 9:30 in the morning with a tool bag between his boots and no idea what came next. His phone buzzed. He looked at it, half expecting Tony saying something apologetic, something useless, but it wasn't Tony. It was a reminder he'd set 3 days ago. Mom appointment Thursday. Pick up prescription. Marcus stared at that reminder for a long time. Then he put the phone back in his pocket and stared at the traffic moving on Jefferson. A city bus went by. A kid on a bicycle. 2 women walking with coffee cups, talking and laughing about something, the sound of it carrying briefly over the noise of the street and then disappearing. He thought about going back, ran it through his head, walking back into Morrison's, telling Brenda he was sorry, that he'd pay for the parts, that it wouldn't happen again. He knew how that conversation would go. Brenda had taken back people she'd fired before. The trick was to go back humble, go back small, swallow whatever made you stand up in the first place and replace it with something easier for her to manage. He sat with that for about 45 seconds. Then he picked up his tool bag and stood up. No, not that. Marcus started walking again in the direction of home, doing the real math now. 11 days until rent. A little over $600 in checking. The prescription refill was due in 4 days. That was $240 gone right there, assuming the pharmacy had it in stock. He could call around to other shops. Farrington's was probably hiring. He'd heard that from Danny 2 weeks ago, but even if they took him tomorrow, he wouldn't see a paycheck for 2 weeks. And that was if everything went perfectly. He pulled out his phone and called his sister in Sacramento. It rang 4 times. "Hey, you've reached Marisol. Leave me something." He hung up. Not because he didn't want to talk to her, but because he didn't know what to say yet. "Hey, I got fired this morning for helping an old woman." That sentence would worry her in the wrong directions. She'd offer money she didn't really have and feel guilty about it. She'd suggest he move to Sacramento, and the conversation would become about that instead of the actual problem. He texted her instead. "Call me when you get a chance. Everything's okay. Just want to talk." Marcus got home at 10:15. Dorothy was at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and the crossword from Sunday's paper she hadn't finished yet. She was wearing her house robe and the good slippers Marcus had gotten her for Christmas 2 years ago, and her reading glasses were down on her nose. She looked up when he came in, and the first thing she did was glance at the clock on the microwave. "You're early." "Slow morning." He set his tool bag down by the door and went to the refrigerator, opened it, stared into it without taking anything out. The way people do when they need a moment that doesn't require explanation. "Marcus." He closed the refrigerator. "Mijo, come sit down." "I'm fine, Mom." "You're standing in the kitchen looking at nothing. Sit down." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat. She took her glasses off, set them on the table, looked at him with the particular attention mothers who have raised children alone develop over years of reading rooms and faces and silences. "What happened?" "I don't want you to worry." "I'm going to worry either way. So you might as well tell me so I can worry about the right thing. He looked at his hands on the table. I got let go today. She didn't gasp, didn't immediately start talking. Dorothy Hayes had been through enough in her life to know that the first response to hard news isn't words. It's just being present while the news settles. After a moment, why? I did some work for a woman and didn't charge her. She was elderly. She was by herself. She was driving with bad brakes. I fixed the car. Brenda found out and fired me. Dorothy was quiet again. Then, was it the right thing to do? Yes. Then you don't have anything to be ashamed of. I didn't say I was ashamed, Mom. I said I was fired. Those are different problems. She almost smiled. Don't be smart with me. I learned it from you. This time she did smile, brief and real. Then she folded her hands around her tea mug and looked at him. Seriously, how much time do we have? 11 days on rent. The prescription is in 4. She nodded, absorbing this. I can call Dr. Mendez about samples again. He gave me a week's worth last time. That's not a solution. That's a delay. A delay is still time. She tilted her head. What are your options? Farrington's might be hiring. There's a Jiffy Lube that opened on Route 9. I could go in today. I've got my full toolbox. I can start doing side work out of the driveway if you don't mind the noise. I don't mind the noise. I mind you being too proud to ask for help when you need it. I'm not too proud. He stopped. You're too proud, she said gently. You always have been. It's your best quality and your worst quality. And sometimes I don't know whether to be proud of you or shake you. He rubbed his face with both hands. I need to start making calls. Make your calls. She reached across the table and put her hand over his briefly, the way she had when he was a boy and something at school had gone wrong. You didn't do anything wrong today, Marcus. That's what matters. The money is a problem we can solve. Your character is not something you get back once you compromise it. He looked at her. Dorothy's eyes were steady, clear. 65 years old, widowed 29 years, raised a son alone on laundry service wages and night shifts, and every form of sacrifice that doesn't get recorded anywhere except in the lines on a person's face. Your father was a man who made practical choices one after another, Dorothy said. He chose the easier thing, the comfortable thing, the thing that cost him nothing. And you know what he ended up with? Marcus knew. He'd grown up knowing. I raised you different. I don't regret it. Not for one day. He squeezed her hand once and then stood, because if he sat there any longer, something was going to shift in his face that he didn't want her to see. I'm going to make some calls. Don't worry about the prescription. I'll figure it out. I know you will. You always do. He went to his room and closed the door and sat on the edge of his bed and made the calls. Farrington's, the guy who answered, said the foreman was out until Thursday. Could he call back then? The Jiffy Lube on Route 9 had an opening, but it was part-time to start. $15 an hour, no benefits. He wrote down the number. There was a dealership service center over in Westfield that he'd heard paid better, but the commute without reliable transportation was going to be a problem. He called anyway, got voicemail, left a message that was as clear and professional as he could make it on the third call of the morning on the worst day he'd had in a while. By noon he had 2 callbacks scheduled and 3 maybes. He ate lunch at the kitchen table with Dorothy. The same lunch he would have eaten from his brown paper bag at Morrison's because he'd taken it with him when he left. And they talked about other things. Her crossword, the neighbor's dog that had been barking at 4 in the morning, a television show she'd been watching about families who restore old houses, normal things. The kind of conversation that fills a room with the ordinary and holds the hard stuff at the edges where it doesn't have as much power. He was washing their 2 plates when his phone rang. Unknown number, local area code. He almost didn't answer. Almost let it go to voicemail because he was tired and his shoulder hurt from the tool bag, and he'd already had enough surprises for one morning. He answered. Is this Marcus Hayes? A woman's voice. Older, but not the voice he would have expected to hear today. Professional, composed. Speaking. Mr. Hayes, my name is Catherine Holt. I work for Catherine Sterling. I believe you met Mrs. Sterling this morning. Marcus went very still. He turned off the faucet. Yes, I did. Mrs. Sterling would like to meet with you if you're available. She asked me to call and arrange a time. Meet with me about what? She didn't give me all the details. She asked me to reach out and schedule a meeting. She said to tell you it was important and that she hoped you'd be willing. Where does she want to meet? She's asking if you'd come to her office tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, if that works for you. If it doesn't, she'll arrange whatever time is convenient. Marcus looked out the kitchen window. A pigeon sat on the telephone wire, just sitting there. Her office. Sterling Investment Group, Meridian Avenue, 22nd floor. He didn't recognize the name right away. He repeated it in his head. Sterling Investment Group. He'd driven past Meridian Avenue 100 times. Glass towers. The kind of building with marble lobby floors and security desks and people in suits who walked like they were always slightly late for something important. I'll be there. Wonderful. I'll send a confirmation to this number. Please ask for Catherine at the security desk and I'll bring you up. The call ended. Marcus set the phone down on the counter and stood there for a moment. He knew Eleanor Voss hadn't left her wallet at home. He'd known it in the parking lot, if he was honest with himself. The wallet had been in the purse. He'd seen the shape of it, the slight rectangular outline on the left side where it always sits when a person has carried the same bag long enough that everything has its place. He'd known, and he'd let her have the exit she needed, because making an elderly woman stand in a garage and prove she couldn't pay for something would have been unkind. And Marcus Hayes did not deal in unkindness. What he hadn't known, what he was only beginning to understand now as he stood in his kitchen in the middle of the day, unemployed, with 11 days until rent was due, was why she'd needed that exit, why she'd chosen not to pay, what she'd been looking for. He went back to his room and looked up Sterling Investment Group, sat on the edge of his bed and read for a long time. The company was a private investment firm founded in 1987 by Gerald and Catherine Sterling. Gerald had died in 2019. The company held stakes in real estate, manufacturing, and, Marcus scrolled down, a portfolio of automotive service businesses across 6 states. He read that last part again. Automotive service businesses across 6 states. He looked at photographs. Catherine Sterling at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Catherine Sterling at a charity gala, smiling smaller than everyone around her in a navy dress, holding a glass of water. Catherine Sterling at what appeared to be a groundbreaking event, standing in front of a building with a shovel in her hands and an expression on her face that was deeply familiar to Marcus. It was the expression of someone who has worked long and hard for something and is allowing themselves one moment of visible satisfaction. He looked at her in those photographs and thought about her in his shop that morning, the tan overcoat, the hands wrapped around the purse, the way she'd said, "I feel like such a nuisance." His phone buzzed. The confirmation from Catherine Holt, exactly as promised, with the address and floor number and a note. Please ask for Catherine at the security desk and she will bring you up. Marcus sat with it. He couldn't decide what to do with the feeling building in him because it was made of too many things at once. There was something that might have been hope, which he was suspicious of, because hope in difficult circumstances had a way of making the fall worse when things didn't work out. There was something that might have been fear, not of Catherine Sterling exactly, but of the size of the distance between that woman's world and his. He thought about the 22nd floor and the marble lobby and the people in suits, and he thought about his hands that never fully came clean, and the tool bag by the front door, and the brown paper bag lunch. She's a businesswoman, he thought. Whatever this is, it's not charity. Go find out. He came back out to the kitchen. Dorothy had moved to the living room, was watching her program with the volume low. He sat down in the armchair across from her. Mom, do you know anything about a company called Sterling Investment Group? She muted the television. Sterling Investment Group? She thought about it. Gerald Sterling. He used to be in the news when I was younger. Came from nothing, built something big. He was one of those, a real one. Not the ones who say they came from nothing. He actually did. She tilted her head. Why? His wife came into the shop this morning. She's the woman I helped, and she wants to meet with me tomorrow. Dorothy looked at him for a long moment. What kind of woman was she? What do you mean? I mean, when you looked at her, what did you see? Marcus thought about Eleanor in the waiting area, holding that clipboard at arm's length. He thought about the quilt on the back seat and the library book. He thought about the way grief had moved across her face when she talked about her husband. A real one, not the kind who says they are. Dorothy nodded slowly, with the particular gravity of a woman who has spent a lifetime reading people accurately. Then go to the meeting, mijo, and wear your good shirt. He almost laughed. Which one? The blue one, and iron it. I know how to iron a shirt. You know how to think you ironed a shirt, she said, and unmuted her program. That night, Marcus sat at the kitchen table long after Dorothy had gone to bed and tried to think clearly about what he knew and what he didn't. He knew Catherine Sterling had come to Morrison's not entirely by accident. Or maybe she had. Maybe the car noise was real. But people with her kind of resources had people for that kind of thing. They didn't drive a 20-year-old Accord to a shop on Jefferson Avenue on a Wednesday morning unless there was something they were looking for that they couldn't send someone else to find. He knew she'd watched him work. He'd felt it. That particular quality of attention from the waiting area, the kind you feel on the back of your neck when someone isn't looking at a magazine but at you. He knew she'd set up the wallet moment, maybe to see what he'd do, maybe to see whether he'd let her off without embarrassment or whether he'd press her, push the transaction, make her feel like the interaction was really about money after all. What he didn't know was what she'd seen in him that was worth a meeting on the 22nd floor. He wasn't special. He was a mechanic who'd done a decent thing on an ordinary morning. He'd done decent things before and they'd cost him before, and he'd done them anyway because that was how he was built. He didn't know what she was going to offer him, if she was going to offer him anything. He didn't know if he was walking into something good or something that was going to make him feel like a fool. Marcus folded his hands on the table and stared at the middle distance. He thought about Brenda's face when she'd said, "You're done," the flatness of it, the absolute confidence that she was right about how the world worked. You don't give away labor. You don't confuse feelings with business. You don't let a stranger's need become your problem. Those were the rules, and if you couldn't follow them, you didn't belong at the table. Maybe she's right about how the world works, he thought. Then he thought about the Accord pulling out of the lot, the engine turning over clean, the brakes holding. He got up, rinsed his glass, turned off the kitchen light, and went to bed. He slept better than he expected. In the morning, he ironed the blue shirt. Dorothy supervised from the doorway, pointed out a crease he'd missed near the collar. He fixed it without arguing. Got to Meridian Avenue at 9:40 because Marcus Hayes was the kind of man who arrived early and waited rather than the kind who walked in at the last minute with an apology. He stood on the sidewalk and looked up at the building for a moment. Glass and steel, 30 floors at least, the kind of architecture designed to tell you something before you even walked in. The lobby was exactly what he'd expected. Marble floors, security desk with 2 guards, a directory board listing companies Marcus had never heard of occupying floors he couldn't imagine needing. He gave his name at the desk. The guard made a call. A minute later, Catherine Holt came down in the elevator herself, mid-50s, sharp suit, the kind of efficient manner that told you she'd been managing important things for a long time and preferred it that way. "Mr. Hayes." Her handshake was direct. "Thank you for coming." "Of course." She brought him up in the elevator, and they made the brief, polite conversation that elevator rides with strangers require. Then the doors opened on the 22nd floor, and Marcus walked into Sterling Investment Group's main offices. It was quieter than he'd expected. There was wood and glass and light, and it was orderly in the way serious work is orderly, not the way performance is. People moved purposefully. Nobody looked up to evaluate him, which he'd half expected and half braced for. Catherine led him to a conference room and told him Mrs. Sterling would be with him in a moment and asked if he wanted coffee. He said yes. She brought it herself rather than calling someone else to bring it, which told him something. He was still thinking about that when the door opened. Catherine Sterling walked in wearing different clothes than yesterday, a dark blazer, cream blouse, but the bearing was the same. That particular kind of straightness that isn't pride exactly, but is something close to it. The posture of someone who has earned the right to take up the space they're standing in. She was carrying a folder, and she set it on the table and then pulled out the chair across from Marcus and sat down. She looked at him. "You knew." Not accusatory, just direct. "Knew what?" "About the wallet." Marcus looked back at her steadily. "I thought you might have it." She nodded slowly. "And you didn't say anything. What would have been the point?" A small pause. "A lot of people would have pointed it out. Made sure I knew they knew. Made sure I felt what they'd done for me. That's not why I did it." "I know." She opened the folder. "That's exactly why I called you." The folder had 3 things in it. Marcus could see them from where he sat. A photograph, a document of some kind, and what looked like a business card or small envelope. Catherine didn't reach for any of them right away. She folded her hands on top of the folder and looked at Marcus the way she'd looked at him the day before in the waiting area. Not assessing exactly, but attending. The full weight of her attention, quiet and unhurried. "How long were you at Morrison's?" 6 years? And before that? 2 years at a dealership over in Westfield. Before that, vocational school. You're good. I mean technically. I've had that car serviced 4 times in the last 2 years and nobody caught the tie rod. You found it in under 5 minutes. It was obvious once you put it on the lift. To someone who knows what to look for. She paused. Did you know who I was yesterday? No. But you looked me up last night. It wasn't a question. Yes. And this morning when you came in, were you nervous? Marcus thought about standing on the sidewalk looking up at the building. He thought about leaving the tool bag in the truck. A little. But not for the reason you might think. What reason then? I wasn't nervous about you. I was nervous about hoping for something. I've learned to be careful with that. Something moved in Catherine's expression. Brief and real, the way things are real when they aren't performed. She looked down at the folder for a moment, then back up. My husband Gerald used to say that the most dangerous thing in business wasn't incompetence. It was cynicism. Competent people who'd been beaten down enough times that they'd stopped trusting their own instincts, stopped acting on them. She tapped the folder lightly with 2 fingers. He spent 30 years looking for people who still had both the skill and the instinct. He said they were rarer than anyone admitted. Marcus said nothing. He waited. I've been running this company since Gerald died. 4 years. I know what I'm doing. Don't misread me. I'm not telling you I'm lost without him. But there are things he did that I've had to learn to do myself, and one of them was finding people. She paused. Gerald had a gift for it. He could walk into a room and identify within 20 minutes who in that room was genuinely good and who was performing goodness. I've had to be more deliberate about it. Is that what yesterday was? Deliberate? She looked at him steadily. The car noise was real. I've been meaning to have it looked at for 2 weeks. My assistant kept scheduling it with a service center, and I kept rescheduling because I don't like service centers. They make you feel like a problem to be processed. She picked up her coffee. I ended up on Jefferson Avenue because I got turned around trying to find the post office. I saw Morrison's auto and pulled in. So it was an accident. The arrival was an accident. What I decided to do once I was there was not. She opened the folder then and took out the photograph first, set it on the table and turned it so Marcus could see. It was an aerial photograph of a building, large commercial space, single story, wide lot, good street frontage. He could see the parking area, the bays, what looked like a customer entrance on the left side. The building was there but clearly vacant or close to it. The lot was empty, the signage removed, just bare fascia above the entrance. Where is this? 1420 Commerce Drive, about 3 miles from where you used to work. He looked at the photograph a moment longer. What's the square footage? 8,200 on the shop floor, another 1,200 in office and waiting area, 8 bays. The lift equipment is still there. previous operator left it when they closed. Marcus looked up from the photograph. Previous operator. An automotive group that was part of a larger portfolio we acquired 18 months ago. The location underperformed consistently. The management was, she paused, choosing the word carefully, not what we needed. So it's been sitting empty for 4 months because we haven't found the right person to run it. Marcus set the photograph down on the table and looked at Catherine Sterling and said nothing for a moment because he was being careful. He was being very careful. Because this was the kind of moment where a person who'd been carrying a lot of weight for a long time could make the mistake of reaching for something too fast and missing entirely. Mrs. Sterling, I appreciate what you're saying. I do. But I need to understand what you're actually proposing, because right now it sounds like something I shouldn't let myself believe yet. She appreciated that. He could see it. She nodded once. Fair. She reached for the document in the folder, set it in front of him. It was a 2-page summary. He could see the headings, the numbers, the structure of it. An operating agreement. His name wasn't on it yet, but the blank lines were there. What I'm proposing is a partnership. Sterling Investment Group provides the location, the equipment, and startup capital for the first 6 months of operating costs. You provide the labor, the management, the expertise, and the character of the place. Marcus looked at the summary without touching it yet. Split 60-40 in your favor on net operating income until the startup capital is repaid. Then 70-30 in your favor ongoing. You run it, you hire who you want, you set the rates, you decide what kind of shop it is. And what does Sterling Investment Group get for 30%? 30% of a reliable asset in a portfolio that has an underperforming gap and the satisfaction of not having wasted a good piece of real estate. She paused. Gerald would have told you we also get the best kind of return, which is the kind that comes from backing someone who's actually worth backing. Marcus sat back in his chair. He thought about Brenda's face when she said you're done. He thought about sitting on the bus bench with a tool bag. He thought about the math he'd been doing in his head for 6 months, moving numbers around, cutting things out, making the arithmetic of someone else's pain fit into the space of a mechanic's wage. He thought about Dorothy at the kitchen table saying, your character is not something you get back once you compromise it. Why me? You don't know me. You spent 40 minutes with me yesterday. I've spent 40 minutes with a lot of people. Most of them spent that time telling me who they were. You didn't tell me anything. You just were. She looked at him directly. You treated me like a person, Mr. Hayes. Not a customer, not a problem, not an opportunity. A person. You explained what was wrong with my car without making me feel stupid. You let me keep my dignity when I stood there pretending I'd left my wallet at home. She paused. And then you got fired for it. How did you know about that? I called the shop yesterday afternoon. I wanted to thank whoever managed the service and leave a positive review. Brenda Morrison told me you no longer worked there. When I asked why, she told me that too. Apparently she felt you needed the education. Catherine's voice remained level, but there was something under it. Not anger exactly, but the precise opposite of approval. That's when I called Catherine. Marcus looked at the document on the table. He looked at the photograph of the building on Commerce Drive. He thought about 8 bays and 8,200 square feet and lift equipment already in place and his name on a sign above a door he'd never walked through. He thought about being afraid of hope. I'd need a lawyer to look at this. Of course. I'd need to understand the full terms, not just the summary. I'd be disappointed if you didn't. And I'd want to see the space before I agree to anything. I'll have Catherine arrange it for today if you're available. Catherine folded her hands again. Mr. Hayes, I'm not asking you to make a decision right now. I'm asking you to take this seriously and think about it and talk to whoever you need to talk to. I'll tell you what I told every person Gerald ever brought into this company. We don't want people who say yes because they're desperate. We want people who say yes because they understand what they're agreeing to and they believe in it. What if I look at everything and decide it's not right? Then I'll thank you for your time and we'll find someone else. She said it simply. But I'll tell you honestly, I've been looking at that building for 4 months. I haven't found anyone I wanted to call. Marcus picked up the summary, read through it slowly, the way he read anything mechanical. Not scanning, not skimming, but actually reading each line, following the logic of each number to the next. He asked 2 questions about the capital structure, and Catherine answered them both without hesitation, with the precision of someone who understood every element of what she was proposing. When he finished, he set the document down. "Can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask." "What you said about your husband finding people, backing people who were worth it. Do you think this is what he would have done with me?" Catherine was quiet for a moment, and Marcus had the sense that the question had reached somewhere genuine in her. She looked at the photograph of the building on the table, and then she looked at Marcus. Gerald had a rule. He said he would never invest in a business that he wouldn't want his own children to walk into as customers. The quality of the person running it was the only real indicator that mattered to him. She paused. He also had a saying that I've thought about every day for the last 4 years. He used to say the world runs on what people do when nobody's watching. She looked at Marcus with that full, attending look. "You didn't know who I was yesterday. There was nothing to gain. And you still did the right thing." Marcus thought about that for a moment. "He sounds like the kind of man I would have respected." He was the kind of man everyone respected once they met him. And the grief was in her voice again, not overwhelming, not performed, just present, the way grief is in people who have integrated it and carry it as part of themselves rather than something separate. "He also would have liked you, Mr. Hayes. He had a weakness for mechanics, said they were the last honest professionals left, because you can either fix the car or you can't." Marcus almost smiled at that. Catherine came back in then, knocked once, and opened the door. "Mrs. Sterling, you have the 11 o'clock. Catherine nodded without looking away from Marcus. "Give me 5 minutes." When Catherine closed the door again, Catherine reached into the folder and took out the small envelope Marcus had noticed earlier. She set it on top of the document summary. "That's a key to the Commerce Drive location. Catherine has the full address. Go look at it today, tomorrow, whenever you're ready. Walk the floor, get a feel for the space. Talk to your people, your lawyer, whoever you trust." She stood up and Marcus stood up with her because that was how he'd been raised. "Then call Catherine and tell her what you decide, and if you decide yes, we start the paperwork Monday." She extended her hand across the table. He shook it, and her grip was firm, not performative, the handshake of someone who had closed a great many deals in a great many rooms and understood that the grip was the truth of the intention. "One more thing." Marcus hadn't let go yet. "Why the old car? Why the overcoat? You could have walked into Morrison's in something a lot different." Catherine looked at him, and something moved in her eyes that was very close to amusement. "When Gerald and I were starting out, we had nothing. We drove a '91 Civic with a cracked dashboard, and we ate dinner at home every night because restaurants were a luxury. I know exactly what it feels like to wonder if the person you're asking for help is going to treat you like a burden or like a human being." She paused. "I still drive the Accord. I've had it for 11 years. Gerald thought I should replace it, and I kept telling him the car still runs. Why would I replace a car that still runs?" A brief pause. "He was right about most things, but not about that." Marcus picked up the envelope with the key, put it in the shirt pocket next to the photograph of Dorothy at his graduation. He walked out of Sterling Investment Group at 10:50 in the morning with a summary document folded carefully in his hand and the key to a building he hadn't yet seen pressed against his chest. He stood on the sidewalk outside the glass tower and called his sister. This time she answered. "Hey, you okay? Got your text last night." "I'm okay. I've had a couple of unusual days." "Define unusual." "I got fired yesterday morning." "Marcus, and this morning a woman offered me my own shop." Silence. Then, "I'm here. I'm just—" She exhaled. "Start from the beginning. Right now. Start from the beginning." He told her the whole thing standing on the sidewalk on Meridian Avenue. And she listened the way she always listened, with interruptions, with "oh my God" at least twice, with the particular quality of a younger sister who has always believed her older brother was better than the world was giving him credit for, and is now processing the possibility that the world finally caught up. "Go look at the shop. Right now. I was going to go today. And call me after." "I will." "And Marcus?" She stopped. "What?" "Mom's going to cry." "Mom doesn't cry." "Mom is absolutely going to cry. I'm warning you now." He laughed, genuine and unguarded, the first real laugh he'd had since yesterday morning. "I'll call you after I see the space. Promise." "Promise." He hung up and went to get his truck. Commerce Drive was a wide commercial street in an area that was neither declining nor thriving, but had the particular quality of a neighborhood waiting to become something. There were a few other businesses on the block, a tile warehouse, a plumbing supply company, what looked like a printing shop, and at 1420, set back slightly from the street with a concrete lot in front and a good wide entrance, was the building from the photograph. Marcus parked and got out and stood in the lot for a moment. From the outside it had good bones. The sign above the entrance was blank, just smooth fascia where something else had been. Two of the big bay doors had leaves blown against the base, and the landscaping along the front was overgrown, but the structure was solid. The roof looked new or close to it. The windows were intact. He took the key out of his pocket, opened the main door and stepped into what would be the customer entrance, a lobby of sorts, smaller than Morrison's but better positioned, with windows that faced the lot and let in the morning light. The counter was still there. The chairs along one wall were still there. Everything was dusty, and the air had the particular stale quality of a space that had been closed for months. But underneath that he could feel the potential of it, the way a mechanic can sometimes feel what an engine wants before he's even opened the hood. He pushed through the door to the shop floor. 8 bays. He counted them twice. The lifts were there. 4 2-post lifts and 2 4-post lifts. Good brands, mid-range but reliable. Tool storage along the back wall. A parts area in the corner that would need reorganizing but had the right bones. Good overhead lighting, the fluorescent kind that showed you exactly what you were working on. He walked the floor slowly, all the way to the back, all the way around, stood in the middle of the space and looked at the ceiling and looked at the bays and looked at the parts area and looked at the entrance through the glass. He thought about what it would sound like in here when it was running. The sound of work, compressors, ratchets, the radio somebody would put on that everyone would complain about but nobody would change. Voices. The particular rhythm of a shop floor when the people on it know what they're doing and trust each other. He thought about Tony, who'd stared at the floor when Brenda fired him. Tony was a good mechanic, one of the best Marcus had worked with. And he was also a man who'd been at Morrison's for 9 years and had been passed over for foreman twice and had never quite stopped being angry about it, even though he didn't talk about it directly. He thought about Danny, the kid who'd been there 6 months and had started as a parts runner and was picking up actual skills fast, faster than anyone was giving him credit for. He thought about what kind of shop he would build if he were building one from scratch, with no one to answer to except the work and the customers and his own sense of what was right. Marcus stood in the middle of the floor for a long time, then he took out his phone and called Catherine Holt. She answered on the second ring. "Mr. Hayes?" "I'm at the space. What do you think?" Marcus looked up at the ceiling of the shop, at the good light coming through the high windows, at the lifts and the empty bays, and the counter at the back where a parts manager would stand. "I think I need a lawyer to look at the documents, and I think I need to have a conversation with my mother. But I also think—" He paused. "Tell Mrs. Sterling I'd like to move forward." A brief pause on Catherine's end. "I'll let her know. I'll send you the full agreement today. Do you have an attorney?" "I'll find one. If you need a referral, I can provide one. Someone independent, not connected to our firm. Mrs. Sterling prefers it that way. She says the deal only works if both sides have proper counsel." That was, Marcus thought about that for a moment. That's not how most people operate. No, Catherine said it quietly. It isn't. We'll talk soon, Mr. Hayes. He hung up and stood in the empty shop for a few more minutes, alone in the silence of the space, with the key in his hand and the morning light coming through those high windows and the weight of the last 48 hours settling around him into something he didn't quite have a word for yet. It wasn't happiness exactly. It was something older and more solid than that, the feeling of a man who has held his ground when it cost him and is standing in a room that is the consequence of that. He locked the front door behind him when he left, drove home past Morrison's auto without slowing down, didn't look at the sign, didn't look at the bays. He watched the road ahead and kept both hands on the wheel and drove. Dorothy was in the kitchen when he got home. She looked up when he came through the door, and she read his face the way she'd been reading it for 38 years, and whatever she saw there made her take her glasses off and set them on the table. "Sit down. I have something to tell you." She sat. He pulled out the chair across from her, the same chair he'd sat in yesterday morning when he told her about being fired, and he sat down and put the document summary and the key on the table between them. She looked at them. She looked at him. "Tell me." So he did. He told her all of it. Catherine in the shop, the wallet moment, the photograph of the aerial view, the folder with the summary and the key, the shop floor with its 8 bays and its good light, and the lifts that were already there waiting. He told her what Catherine had said about Gerald, about finding people, about the world running on what people do when nobody's watching. He told her about standing in the middle of the shop floor with his phone in his hand and making the call to Catherine Holt. Dorothy listened without saying a word. Her hands were folded on the table in front of her, still and composed, and her eyes were steady on his face. When he finished, the kitchen was very quiet. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. The same gesture from the morning before, but different now. Not the gesture of a mother steadying a son against something hard, but something else. Recognition. The deep, quiet recognition of a woman who raised a man alone and spent every day of that process wondering if what she was putting into him would be enough when it mattered. "I knew." Knew what? That it would come back to you? Her voice was careful, controlled. "I've watched you your whole life give more than you got and never complain and never cut corners on who you were. I used to lie awake some nights and wonder if I'd done you wrong by raising you that way, if the world was just going to take from you." She pressed her lips together. "But I knew. I always knew." Her eyes were bright. Marcus looked at his mother, the woman who had worked double shifts in a hospital laundry so he could go to vocational school, who had sat at this same table through every hard year and never once told him to be less than he was, who still did her crossword every morning and called things by their right names, and whose hip hurt every day, and who never, not once in his memory, made him feel like that pain was his fault. "Marisol said you were going to cry." Dorothy straightened up. "Marisol is wrong." Then she took a breath and her chin lifted slightly and 2 tears ran down her face in perfect parallel, quick and unannounced, and she wiped them away with the back of her hand, with the brisk efficiency of a woman who has decided that 2 tears is the allotted amount, and that is all. "See?" Marcus said it softly. She was right. "Don't push it." Dorothy reached for the document summary. "Now let me read this and call a lawyer." The lawyer's name was Robert Castillo, and he had a small office above a tax preparation service on Dunmore Street and a handshake that meant something. Catherine Holt had given Marcus 3 names to choose from, all of them independent, and Marcus had picked Castillo because when he'd called to introduce himself, Castillo had asked more questions than he'd answered, and Marcus trusted a man who knew what he didn't know. They met Thursday afternoon. Castillo read the full agreement while Marcus sat across from him and drank bad coffee from a paper cup, and when Castillo finished, he took off his reading glasses and turned the document sideways and read 2 sections again. "This is a legitimate offer." "I know. I mean genuinely legitimate. The terms are fair. Better than fair, actually. The 70-30 split after repayment is generous for a passive investor holding real estate. He tapped the document. There are 2 clauses I want to renegotiate. The exit terms if the partnership dissolves. Right now, they favor Sterling Investment Group in ways I think you should push back on. And the definition of net operating income needs to be more specific or it becomes a conversation every quarter. Can we get those changes? We can ask. Castillo picked up his phone. In my experience, when someone offers genuinely good terms, they're usually willing to clarify the things that need clarifying. It's the bad deals that can't withstand questions. They sent the red line document to Catherine Holt on Friday morning. By Friday afternoon, Catherine Sterling had approved both changes without negotiation. Castillo called Marcus to tell him, and there was something in his voice, quiet, professional surprise, that told Marcus this didn't happen often. She approved both. Both. No counter, no delay. Catherine just wrote back and said, "I'm reading this directly. Mrs. Sterling says the changes are reasonable, and she wants Mr. Hayes to feel comfortable with every line of what he's signing." Marcus sat with that for a moment. "Sign it." Castillo's voice was firm. "I've done 100 of these. Sign it." He signed it Monday morning. Dorothy insisted on coming with him to Sterling Investment Group's offices, which meant she got dressed in her good church clothes and wore the pearl earrings she saved for serious occasions, and sat in the passenger seat of Marcus's truck with her hands folded in her lap and her chin level, looking for all the world like a woman attending an event she had always known was coming. In the conference room on the 22nd floor, Catherine Sterling stood when they came in, which Marcus had not expected, and when he introduced Dorothy, Catherine took her hand in both of hers. "Your son is a remarkable man, Mrs. Hayes." Dorothy looked at Catherine Sterling with that direct, undeflectable gaze she had. "I know. I raised him." Catherine laughed, genuine and unguarded, the laugh of a woman who had been in rooms full of careful people for a very long time and was delighted to meet someone who didn't bother with careful. "I believe that completely." Marcus signed where Castillo had marked the pages. Catherine signed opposite him. Catherine Holt witnessed. It took 11 minutes, and when it was done, Catherine set her pen down and looked at Marcus across the table. "Hayes Automotive, that's what I'd call it, if you'll allow me an opinion. It's your building. It's our building." She corrected it firmly but without heat. "And it's your name." He thought about it for approximately 3 seconds. Hayes Automotive. And that was that. The next 6 weeks were the hardest and the best Marcus had known as an adult, and he would say that later not to be dramatic about it but because it was precisely true. Every day had the quality of building something with your hands, which Marcus understood better than most people. The satisfaction of it wasn't loud. It was the quiet, accumulating satisfaction of problems solved in sequence, of progress you could measure at the end of each day by looking at what was different from the morning. The building needed cleaning first. A full day of it, Marcus and a guy he hired off a referral, going through the shop floor and the waiting area with industrial cleaners and fresh air and the kind of attention a space needs when it's been closed and waiting. Marcus did most of it himself because he wanted to know every corner of the place, every drain and ceiling tile and length of wall, the way you have to know something to own it properly. He spent 3 days doing a full inventory of the lift equipment, testing each one, checking the hydraulics, replacing 2 seals on the 4-post lift in Bay 6 that had dried out during the closure. He sourced parts and supplies, opening accounts with 3 different distributors, negotiating terms that were reasonable without being aggressive, because Marcus understood that the people you do business with are going to be your partners in the hard moments too, and it doesn't pay to start any relationship by trying to win every point. He called Tony on the 3rd day. "You heard?" Marcus didn't make it a question. "Danny texted me about it this morning. I didn't believe it at first. Your own shop, man. I need a foreman, someone I trust to run the floor when I'm dealing with the business side, someone who knows the work and knows how to get the best out of people." He paused. "I'm not going to offer you something I can't back up. The first 3 months I can pay you what you're making at Morrison's. After that, If the numbers are where I think they'll be, we talk about a real foreman's salary and a quarterly bonus tied to the shop's performance. Silence on Tony's end. The kind of silence that comes from a man doing calculations he'd never expected to have to make. Tony, I'm here. You've been passed over twice for foreman at Morrison's. I've watched you train 3 people who then outranked you. I'm offering you the job that was always yours. Another silence. Then Tony's voice, doing its best to stay level. When do you need me? 2 weeks from Monday. I'll give my notice tomorrow. I know you will. That's who you are. He called Danny the next day. Danny was 23 and had grown up in the same part of Phoenix as Marcus, and had a mother who worked 2 jobs and a talent for mechanical work that he hadn't yet learned to take seriously because nobody had ever seriously asked him to. Marcus offered him a full-time position, starting wage above what Morrison's was paying him, with the explicit understanding that in 12 months they would evaluate where his skills were and restructure accordingly. Why me? Danny asked it the same way Marcus had asked Catherine, not fishing for a compliment but genuinely wanting to understand. Because you're good at this work, and because nobody's told you that clearly enough yet. I'm telling you now, don't waste it. Danny was quiet for a moment. Mr. Hayes? Marcus. He took a breath. Yeah, I'm in. The sign went up on a Tuesday. Marcus had commissioned it from a local sign company and he'd been specific about what he wanted. Clean, readable, nothing flashy. White background, dark letters. Hayes Automotive. Service you can trust. Below that, the phone number and the hours. He stood in the parking lot and looked at it for a long time after the installers left, took a photograph and sent it to Marisol. She sent back 3 crying emojis and then called him immediately, and he let it go to voicemail because he wanted 1 more minute in the quiet of the parking lot with just the sign and the morning. He sent the photograph to Dorothy, too. She texted back, "Your grandfather would have built something and put his name on it if he'd had the chance. Now you did it for him." He put his phone away and went inside to open for the first day. The first week was slow, which Marcus had expected and planned for. 6 months of operating capital meant he wasn't desperate for volume immediately, and he understood that trust was built customer by customer, that a shop's reputation was laid down 1 car at a time. He put some money into straightforward local advertising, the neighborhood paper, a few targeted social posts that his neighbor's college-age daughter helped him set up, and word of mouth, which he knew from experience was the only advertising that really moved people. By the end of the second week, they had 12 regular customers. By the end of the first month, 27. He kept the pricing honest. Not the lowest in the area because he wasn't trying to win on price. He was trying to win on quality and reliability, and those things cost what they cost. He explained every repair before he did it. He called customers when the job was done rather than waiting for them to call and wonder. He had a coffee machine in the waiting area that made decent coffee, not the kind that existed to technically satisfy the requirement of being a coffee machine. He kept the waiting area clean and supplied with reading material that wasn't exclusively from 3 years ago. Small things. The kind of small things that accumulate into a reputation. He called Catherine at the end of the first month to give her the numbers. She listened, asked 3 questions, and her voice carried quiet approval when she spoke. "This is a good start, Mr. Hayes." Marcus. A pause. Marcus. And he could hear the small shift of warmth in it. "The tie rod on the Accord needs to be rechecked at 30,000 miles. I want to flag it so it doesn't get missed." She laughed. "I'll bring it in." She did. The following Tuesday she drove in unannounced, the same silver Accord, and Tony happened to be the one who came out to meet her. Marcus was in the office when he heard Tony call back, "Marcus, there's a woman here asking specifically for you." He came out and Catherine was standing by her car in a different overcoat this time, gray instead of tan, with the same leather purse and the same bearing, and she looked at the sign above the entrance and then at Marcus and said nothing for a moment. "You did this fast. The work was already in me. I just needed the room." She looked at him the way she had in the conference room, attending fully, present. "How does it feel?" He thought about the honest answer. It feels like responsibility. More than I expected. The guys are counting on me. The customers who've started coming regularly, they're counting on me. It's heavier than I thought it would be. That's how it's supposed to feel. Gerald used to say that the day it stops feeling heavy is the day you've started taking it for granted. She paused. He was right about that one, too. Marcus brought the car in himself and checked the tie rod and found it solid. He'd torqued it right the first time. He'd known he had, but checking it was the right thing to do, and he did it. He topped off the fluids while he was at it. Didn't charge her anything. "Marcus?" Catherine stood by the bay door when he came out to tell her it was done. "Mrs. Sterling." "Catherine." "Catherine." He paused. The fluids were a minute of work. The tie rod was a check, not a repair. "I'm not charging you for a check on work I already did." She looked at him steadily. "This is a business." "It is. And part of running it well is knowing which transactions are commercial and which ones are personal. This one is personal." He held her car key out to her. "You built something with your husband. You've kept it running on your own for 4 years. You drove an old car to a shop on Jefferson Avenue on a wrong turn and made a decision in 40 minutes that changed my life." He paused. "The fluids are mine to give." Catherine took the key. She stood there for a moment with it in her hand and said nothing, and Marcus let the silence be the way she had let his silences be. Then, "Gerald would have liked you very much, Marcus. You told me that before. I'm telling you again because it's still true." She drove away and Tony came and stood beside Marcus in the lot, watching the Accord go. "Who is she?" "A friend." Tony looked at him sideways. "That's the woman from the thing, isn't it? The woman you helped at Morrison's?" "Yeah." Tony was quiet for a moment. "I've been meaning to say something." "You don't have to." "I do." Tony turned to look at him directly, the way men look at each other when they're doing the thing that doesn't come naturally to them, but they've decided to do it anyway. "I should have said something that morning when Brenda was going at you. I stood there. I know. That's not who I want to be. You're here now. That's what matters to me." He looked at his foreman for a moment. "You're a good man, Tony. You've always been. You were in a bad situation for 9 years. That does things to people." Tony nodded slowly. Still, Marcus agreed. They went back inside. The conversation he'd been waiting for came on a Friday morning 6 weeks after the shop opened. He was reviewing the week's numbers at the office desk he'd claimed in the back corner of the small office space. Nothing fancy, just a desk and a chair and a window that looked out onto the shop floor so he could see what was happening without having to walk out every 10 minutes. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. He didn't recognize the number, but the prefix was the same part of Phoenix as Morrison's. Marcus Hayes. "Marcus." A pause. "It's Brenda." He set his pen down. "I got your number from Darren. I hope that's okay." "It's fine." Another pause. He heard her take a breath. "I heard the shop opened. I heard it's going well." "It is." "Good." The word came out flat, and then she seemed to hear how it sounded, and he could hear her trying to recalibrate. That's genuinely good. You built something." "I had help." "Don't do that. Don't be modest about it. You built something." She paused. "I've driven past Commerce Drive and I've seen the sign." Another pause. "I've also lost 4 regulars in the past 6 weeks who now go to you." He said nothing to that. "Mrs. Harris, the Carvajal family, Tom Delaney, the Garcias. I know all of them. I know you do." Brenda's voice was tight now. "They came to me because of you for 3 years, and now they go to you because of you." He picked up his pen again and turned it in his fingers. "Brenda, why are you calling?" She was quiet for a moment. "I don't know. Maybe I just needed to, I don't know, say something." Another pause. "What I did was wrong. Firing you the way I did, in front of everyone, over that. You did what you thought was right I did what I believed was right, and I was wrong." Her voice was tight, controlled, the voice of someone who does not make apologies often and is working hard to make this one properly. You were the best man I had on that floor for 6 years. I knew it every day. I let one morning override 6 years of knowing. Marcus leaned back in his chair and looked out the window at the shop floor where Tony was walking Danny through something on the engine of a Suburban, both of them bent over it, Tony pointing, Danny nodding and asking something, and Tony answering. The radio was on, the country station. Nobody was happy about it, and nobody was changing it. Brenda, I don't have any anger toward you. You should, maybe, but I don't. He watched Tony clap Danny once on the shoulder and move to the next bay. What happened that morning set a chain of events in motion that I couldn't have engineered on purpose. If you hadn't fired me, I'd still be working your floor. I wouldn't have been home when my mother needed me that week. I wouldn't have had the time to meet with Catherine Sterling, to see the space, to do what I needed to do to get this started. He paused. So, I did you a favor. Brenda's tone was dry enough to be almost funny. You did me a firing. The favor part wasn't your intention, but I don't hold the outcome against the intention. A long pause. I've thought about that morning a lot. More than I expected to. What you said to me about margins and Mrs. Gomez and Farrington's, you were right. All of it. I know. She made a sound that might have been a short laugh, might have been something else. You're not going to make this easy, are you? I'm not trying to make it hard. I just don't have anything to be bitter about. You made a decision. I made mine. We're both still in business. He paused. I hope Morrison's does well, Brenda. I mean that. There's enough work in this city for every honest shop on the street. Another silence. Then, you're really not angry? I'm really not. God, that's... She stopped. That's either very evolved or very annoying. I can't tell which. Probably both. She almost laughed. Almost. Right. He heard her collect herself. Okay. I just wanted to call. Wanted you to know I was wrong. A pause. And congratulations, Marcus, on the shop. You deserve it. He sat with that for a moment. 6 years of decent work and never a real acknowledgement from her. And now this brief, imperfect, real thing. Thank you. That means something. They hung up. He set his phone on the desk and looked out the window at the shop floor again. Tony was at Bay 3 now. Danny had moved to Bay 1 and was working independently, steady and focused, the posture of a young man who was starting to believe in his own hands. He thought about Brenda on the phone, the tightness in her voice, the specific precision of "you were the best man I had on that floor for 6 years." He thought about what it cost her to call. He understood cost. He understood the specific weight of saying the thing you should have said when not saying it would have been easier. Marcus picked up his pen and went back to the numbers. 2 days later, on a Sunday, he drove Dorothy to her doctor's appointment himself, the way he always had, but with a different quality of ease in it now. The prescription was filled and paid for and sitting in the cabinet at home, and the next month's prescription was already accounted for in the shop's operating budget because Marcus had built it in as a line item the same week he signed the agreement, because that was the actual thing the business was for. In the waiting room of the doctor's office, Dorothy did her crossword, and Marcus scrolled through the week's appointment requests on his phone. They'd added an online booking system that Danny's neighbor had set up for them, and it had been pulling in new customers steadily since the second week. "You're working." Dorothy didn't look up from the crossword. "I'm looking at bookings. On a Sunday. Business doesn't observe the weekend." "Put the phone away. Sit with me." He put the phone away. He sat with her. The waiting room was quiet on a Sunday morning. Just them and an older man across the room reading a fishing magazine and a young woman with a toddler who kept trying to pick up a floor lamp. After a while, Dorothy said, still looking at her crossword, 13 down. A man of integrity. 7 letters. Marcus looked at the ceiling. Upright. She penciled it in. She counted the squares. That works. They sat in comfortable silence. Then Dorothy said, still looking at her crossword, "Catherine called me." Marcus turned to look at her. What? 2 days ago. She called the house. Dorothy penciled in another answer with the mild authority of a woman who fills in crossword answers in pen and was merely being polite to the puzzle by using a pencil. We talked for 40 minutes. About what? About Gerald mostly. About how she met him. About raising children alone. She glanced at Marcus briefly and then back at the crossword. She told me something he used to say, that a person's values are not what they claim in good times, but what they do in hard ones. Dorothy paused. She said she saw that in you. Marcus said nothing. I told her I'd been watching it my whole life. He looked at his mother. The pearl earrings she was wearing because she wore her good earrings to the doctor because she believed in showing up with dignity everywhere, and the crossword in her lap and the pencil in her hand, and the 45 years of hard work and sacrifice and love that had produced this moment, this Sunday morning, this waiting room, this quiet. Mom, don't. She was still looking at her crossword. I was just going to say thank you. She pressed her lips together, her chin lifted slightly. I know what you were going to say. She filled in another answer. You're welcome, mijo. Now be quiet. I'm almost finished. The toddler across the room had successfully picked up the floor lamp and was holding it triumphantly above his head while his mother tried to negotiate it back down without a scene. The old man with the fishing magazine was watching with the deep appreciation of someone who has been through every stage of parenthood and now gets to watch it happen to someone else. Marcus watched too, and he was almost smiling, and the morning was ordinary in the way that the best mornings are, ordinary in the way that means everything is exactly where it's supposed to be. He didn't know yet that Monday would bring the test he thought he'd already passed. He didn't know that the hardest moment of the whole story was still 12 hours away. But Sunday was Sunday, and Dorothy finished her crossword and the doctor gave her a good report. And on the way home they stopped for coffee at the place on Route 9 that Dorothy liked because they gave you real cups instead of paper, and they sat at a table by the window in the Sunday afternoon light and talked about everything and nothing the way people do when they're not worried about tomorrow. Monday arrived the way Mondays do when you've had a good Sunday. Quietly, without announcement, with the particular neutrality of a day that hasn't decided yet what it's going to be. Marcus was at the shop by 7:15. Tony came in at 7:30. Danny at 7:45, which was 15 minutes early, which had become his habit over the past 3 weeks without anyone asking him to. The radio went on. The coffee machine ran. Bay 1 and Bay 2 had cars already scheduled for 8. The day looked full and clean and manageable. Marcus was at his desk, going through Monday's appointments when Tony knocked on the open office door. There's someone in the lot. Appointment? I don't think so. She's just sitting in her car. He paused. It's a Morrison's van. Marcus looked up. He came out through the waiting area and pushed through the front door. In the lot, parked just off to the side of the main entrance, was a white panel van with the Morrison's auto logo on the side. The green wrench. The block lettering. The driver's door opened and Brenda Morrison got out. She was dressed the way she always dressed. Business casual, sharp, the armor of a woman who had learned early that looking put together in a room full of men was a form of communication. But something was different about how she was carrying it today. The armor was there, but the ease behind it wasn't. She walked toward him and stopped a few feet away and looked at the sign above the entrance and then at Marcus. I should have called first. You're here now? She nodded. She looked at the building, the clean lot, the bays visible through the open doors, the movement inside. She took her time looking at it, and Marcus let her because he understood that she needed to see the full thing before she said whatever she'd come to say. It's good. The setup, the spacing on the bays, you did the signage right. She paused. You always had an eye for how a shop should run. I knew that. Brenda. Not impatiently, just naming her, bringing her to the point the way you bring a conversation to the thing it's actually about. She put her hands in her coat pockets. I lost 2 more regulars this week, the Diageo brothers. They've been coming to me for 8 years. I know the Diageos. They told me they switched because they trust you." She said it without bitterness, which surprised him. "Not because you're cheaper, not because you're closer, because they trust you." She looked at him directly. "I've been in this business my whole adult life, and I have customers who switched over trust. That's—" She stopped. "That's what the thing with the old woman was about, wasn't it? That's what I didn't understand." It was never about the money. It was never about not understanding how a business works. I understand how a business works. I just understand that trust is the business. I know that now." A pause. "You always knew it. I just decided the transaction was more immediate than the relationship." She took that without flinching. "You're right." Another pause. "I came because I owe you more than a phone call." She looked at the ground briefly and then back at him. "What I did, firing you in front of everyone the way I talked to you, that was about my own fear. My margins had been thin for 2 quarters, and I was looking for someone to make responsible for it. And you gave me a moment." She exhaled. "That's not an excuse. I'm explaining what happened. The responsibility is still mine." Marcus looked at Brenda Morrison, the woman who had employed him for 6 years, who had passed over him for every opportunity that came through that shop, who had fired him on a Wednesday morning in front of his peers for doing the most human thing he knew how to do. And he felt nothing that surprised him. No triumph, no residual anger, just the quiet, clear assessment of a man who has moved past something and can look at it now from a distance and see its actual size. "I heard you the first time you said it, on the phone. I accepted it then." "I know. I needed to say it to your face." She glanced at the building again. "And I needed to see this. I needed to see what I let walk out of my shop." Tony appeared in the bay door briefly, registered Brenda, and disappeared back inside with the discretion of a man who had learned to read a situation. "Is there anything else?" She reached into her coat pocket and brought out an envelope. She held it out to him. "The parts from that morning, $92. I told you I'd dock it from your check, but I never did. You left before I processed it." She paused. "I don't want your money in my business. That's not what it was, and it's not what it should have been." Marcus looked at the envelope. He looked at her. He took it, put it in his shirt pocket without opening it, in the same pocket where he'd carried the key to Commerce Drive on the day Catherine Sterling handed it to him, in the same pocket where he'd carried the photograph of Dorothy at his graduation for 6 years on the wall of a locker in a shop that was never going to be his. "You're going to be all right, Brenda. Morrison's has a foundation. Your grandfather built something real. You just need to remember what it was built on." She looked at him for a moment with something in her face he hadn't seen before, not from her, not in 6 years of working in the same building. Humility. The real kind, not the performed kind, the kind that costs something. "Take care of yourself. You too." She walked back to the van, got in, pulled out of the lot with the particular carefulness of someone who is aware they are being watched and is trying to do even the small thing right. Marcus stood in the lot until the van turned onto Commerce Drive and was gone. Then he went back inside and got to work. The day ran clean. All 3 bays were occupied by 9. Tony handled the floor with the authority of a man finally standing in the role that had always been his, and Danny worked Bay 1 with a focus and speed that were weeks ahead of where Marcus had expected him to be at this stage. 2 new customers came in off walk-ins. A woman with a Honda Pilot making a noise she couldn't describe, which turned out to be a heat shield loose against the exhaust, a 20-minute fix, no charge, and she booked a full-service appointment before she left. An older man with a Ram 1500 who said his neighbor had told him about the shop, which meant the neighbor was one of Marcus's regulars, which meant the word of mouth was doing exactly what word of mouth does when the foundation is solid. Marcus worked Bay 4 himself for most of the morning. A full brake job on a Tacoma, methodical and clean, the kind of work that required his hands and freed his mind, which was when he did his clearest thinking. He thought about Brenda in the parking lot. He thought about the envelope in his shirt pocket and the $92, and the specific symbolic weight of a person returning what they took when they no longer wanted to carry it. He thought about what it meant that she'd come in person rather than mailing a check, because people who send checks are settling accounts, and people who show up are settling something else. By noon, the shop had moved 4 cars and had 3 more in the afternoon schedule. He ate lunch at his desk, a real lunch, not a brown paper bag, because Dorothy had started making him food now that he had regular hours and had insisted that a man running a business needed to eat properly, and he looked at the week's numbers and felt for the first time without any qualification that the thing was working. Same afternoon, Mrs. Patricia Ortega came in to pick up her Corolla, fuel pump replacement. Tony had quoted her $350 with parts and labor 2 days ago, and she'd agreed, but Marcus had seen her face when Tony gave her the number. He knew that face. Tony brought her to the counter. "Total's $350, Mrs. Ortega." She opened her purse and started counting cash slowly. 20s, 10s, 5s. She got to 300 and stopped. Looked in the purse again. Checked the zippered pocket. Her face was doing something complicated and careful. "Can I pay $50 next week when my check comes?" Tony glanced at Marcus. Marcus was standing in the doorway to the office, had been watching. He came out to the counter. "Mrs. Ortega, there's been a credit applied to your account." He took the envelope from his shirt pocket, opened it. $92 in cash, just like Brenda said. He counted it out and applied it to Mrs. Ortega's bill. "Your total is $258. Mrs. Ortega stared at him. "Why? Why would you do this?" "Because somebody in this world should be able to get their car fixed. Someone helped me when I needed it. Now it's your turn." Mrs. Ortega's eyes filled. She reached across the counter and hugged him, and Marcus was uncomfortable, but he accepted it because refusing would have taken something from her that she needed to give. She left, and Tony looked at Marcus and didn't say anything, but his face said everything. Marcus went back to Bay 4. Catherine called at 2:30. "How's Monday?" "Good morning. Good bookings for the week." Brenda Morrison came by. He said it matter of fact. A brief pause. What did she want? To apologize. To return $92. To see what she gave up, I think. "How do you feel about that?" He thought about it genuinely, the way Catherine always seemed to invite genuine answers by the quality of her questions. "Fine. I don't need her to have suffered. I just needed her to understand what she got wrong and to say it out loud. She did both." "You're more generous than most people would be." "I don't know if it's generosity. It's just, I'm not carrying anything about it anymore. There's no weight left there. What would be the point of staying angry at something that turned into this?" Catherine was quiet for a moment. "Gerald used to say that resentment was the most expensive thing you could own. It costs you every day and it never pays you back." He's right about everything, this man. I've told him that. The softness in her voice when she said that was the kind of softness that comes from love that has been fully integrated into a life, not raw, not fresh, but permanent. The grief and the love as one thing. He doesn't hear me anymore, but I tell him. "The end of quarter numbers look good, Catherine. I'll have a full report for you by Friday. I'll read it on Monday. Friday I'm taking myself somewhere Gerald loved for the weekend. A place we used to go when we were starting out and couldn't afford much. I go every year." "Good." He meant it simply. "Take care of your mother." It was how she'd started ending their calls recently, not as an instruction, more as a benediction. The specific care of an older woman for a man she'd decided was worth caring about. Always. He was locking up at 6:30. Tony and Danny had left at 6. The lot was empty. The shop floor was clean the way Marcus required it to be at the end of every day, every tool back in its place, every bay ready for tomorrow. When he heard a car pull into the lot, he looked through the glass of the front door. It was a late-model sedan, dark blue, the kind of clean, anonymous car that service managers at dealerships drove. A man got out. Marcus's age, maybe a few years older, in chinos and a collared shirt with a logo Marcus didn't recognize. He came to the door and saw Marcus through the glass and raised a hand in a greeting that was part hello and part "is this okay?" Marcus opened the door. "Sorry, I know you're closing. I'm not a customer. I mean, not today. I'm Jim Peterson. I manage the service department at Westfield Chrysler over on Route 31. Marcus recognized the dealership. He'd applied there the morning after he was fired from Morrison's. He'd left a voicemail that nobody had called back. "Marcus Hayes." They shook hands. "I know. You applied with us about 2 months ago. I got the voicemail. I'm sorry I never called back. We had some transitions happening internally, and some things fell through the cracks." He looked around the lot, at the sign, at the building. "And then I drove past here last week and I saw the sign and I thought, that's the name from the voicemail. And I asked around a little." He paused. "I've heard good things, Mr. Hayes. Consistently good things from people whose opinions I trust. I appreciate that. I'm not here to poach you. I want to be clear about that. I know you've got your own place now. I'm here because we have a fleet account. City vehicles, 23 units, scheduled service and emergency repairs, and our current provider is dropping the account at the end of the month. I'm looking for someone to take it over." Marcus looked at him. "It's steady work. Guaranteed monthly volume. The city pays on time. I know that sounds like a low bar, but in this industry it isn't. And they're not difficult vehicles. Mostly trucks and vans, standard maintenance intervals, occasional brake and suspension work." He paused. "It's the kind of account that provides a floor under your monthly numbers. Lets you plan." Marcus thought about 6 months of operating capital and what came after it. "What are the terms?" "That's a longer conversation. I just wanted to make the introduction in person, see if you were interested in having it." "I'm interested." They exchanged cards and Peterson drove away, and Marcus stood in the empty lot in the early evening light and looked at the sign above the entrance for what felt like the 100th time since it went up, but each time was different. The first time it had been overwhelming. The second time it had been sobering. Somewhere around the 10th time it had become something he recognized as his fully and without qualification, the way you recognize your own name. Now he looked at it and thought about a fleet account and steady volume and planning, and he understood that this was how it built, not in one dramatic moment, but in accumulation, in the patient stacking of right decisions on top of each other until they became something too solid to be taken from you. 6 months after opening, Catherine called Marcus to her office. Not the conference room this time. Her actual office, smaller than he'd expected, windows facing west, Gerald's photograph on the desk in a simple frame. She was sitting behind the desk when Catherine brought him in, and she gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit, please." He sat. There was a folder on her desk, closed, and she had both hands resting on top of it. "I need to tell you something I should have told you months ago." Marcus waited. "When I proposed the partnership to you, when I brought you that folder in the conference room and showed you Commerce Drive, the board of directors opposed it." She said it plainly, no preamble. They considered it wasteful. Company money on a small garage, a decision based on a 40-minute interaction, an emotional choice, not a business one. My CFO threatened to resign. 2 board members demanded a vote of no confidence. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. "I put my position as CEO on the line to back you. If Hayes Automotive failed within the first 6 months, they were going to remove me." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want you carrying that weight. This was my choice to make, my belief, my risk." She slid the folder across the desk. "I presented your 6-month performance report to the board yesterday." He opened it. Revenue 140% of projections. Profit margin 18%. Industry average was 12%. Customer retention 94%. Average rating 4.9 out of 5 stars. They voted unanimously to expand the partnership. They want to offer you 3 more locations. Marcus looked up from the folder. Sterling Automotive Division. You'd oversee Arizona and New Mexico operations. 6 total locations. Compensation $180,000 annually, equity stake, budget for hiring and training. He sat back in his chair. That would mean leaving the floor, less time with my mother. It would mean building something larger than yourself, creating more opportunities like Tony's and Danny's. Can I think about it? Of course. That night at the kitchen table, Dorothy asked him what he wanted to do. I don't know. Part of me wants to stay right here in my bays. Keep it simple. Dorothy was quiet for a moment. Your grandfather would have taken the bigger role. Your father would have run from it. You'll make the right decision. What if I accept but keep working Bay 4 every Monday morning? Stay connected to the actual work? Dorothy smiled. Then you'd honor both who you are and who you're becoming. The next day, Marcus called Catherine with his answer. Accepted the position with one requirement. Works Bay 4 every Monday morning at Hayes Automotive. Hands-on, no exceptions. Catherine's response carried warmth he could hear through the phone. Gerald worked the floor every Monday until he physically couldn't. Said it kept him honest. I'd expect nothing less from you. 1 year after opening, Hayes Automotive held an anniversary gathering. Customers, Tony, Danny, suppliers, Catherine, Dorothy. 3 additional locations now operating: Tucson, Flagstaff, Albuquerque. Each with a manager Marcus had personally trained. Marcus kept his remarks brief, standing in the center of the shop floor. 1 year ago, I was fired for doing what I believed was right. That day I had 11 days before rent was due. My mother needed medication I couldn't afford. I thought everything was over. But I learned that the world doesn't operate on transactions. It operates on trust. Trust builds one choice at a time, when nobody is observing. I learned that sometimes the people who hurt you teach the most important lessons. Brenda Morrison forced me to become who I was meant to be. Catherine Sterling recognized something in me I didn't see in myself, and she honored her husband's memory by creating opportunities for people like me. My mother Dorothy raised me to value character over comfort. She was right. And the $92 that came back to me? I gave it to someone who needed it, because that's how this works. You give when you're able. Someone else gives when you need it. The cycle continues. After the celebration, Catherine handed Marcus a sealed envelope. Gerald wrote this 3 days before he died, made me promise to give it to whoever passed the test. Marcus opened it, read Gerald's handwriting. To whoever reads this, if Catherine has given you this letter, you passed the test. The wallet test. The test of character when nobody's watching. I designed that test because 30 years taught me business success means nothing without human decency. I accumulated wealth, but what I'm proudest of, never compromising who I was to get there. You did something for my wife, for a stranger, that cost you, maybe a job, maybe money, maybe just time. You did it anyway. That tells me everything I need to know. Build something that matters. Treat people with dignity. Pass this forward. When you're my age looking back, you'll know you did it right. Welcome to the family. Gerald Sterling. Marcus folded the letter, looked at Catherine, tears in her eyes but composed. Thank you. For everything. For believing. For honoring him. You honored him by being exactly who he hoped still existed. Dorothy approached and Catherine embraced her, 2 widows with mutual understanding. Wide view, Hayes Automotive sign, busy shop, people working. Marcus walks to Bay 4, puts on work gloves, slides under a car. His voice quiet but certain. I'm still fixing broken things. That's who I am.